Why did Iran's missile attacks drop from 100 missiles at a time to just 10? Trump claimed that the United States destroyed 85% of Iran's missile arsenal. But is that really true? Is Iran actually weaker today than it was before the war started? Some media outlets say Iran is simply preserving its missiles. Others claim Iran no longer has missile launchers. But neither of those explanations is completely true. To find the real reason, you also have to look at the US military. There is something big they are trying to hide, something that exposes all the lies. But to fully understand what's happening, we have to go back to the first day of the war. On the first day of the war, the US conducted 3,000 sortie flights over Iran. One sortie is one mission flown by an aircraft from takeoff until it lands back at its base. But how big is that number? If we look at the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, we see that the US flew less than 2,000 sorties over Iraq. And that was the biggest aerial warfare campaign since World War II. In the first 5 days, they flew about 4,000 sorties. But if we look at Iran, we see an unbelievable number, 7,000 sorties. The US used 400 Tomahawk missiles in Iraq, but against Iran they used 2,000 of them, more than half of their entire stockpile. But why am I telling you this? Because I want you to understand the intensity and the massive scale of this war from the American side. Now things get serious. On the first day of the war, Iran fired 300 ballistic missiles, but the number of drones is not clear. I estimate it was more than 1,000 drones. Now look at today. How many sorties does the US fly today? How many Tomahawk missiles do they launch? Nowadays, the US flies less than 100 sorties, sometimes fewer than 50. They launch only a few cruise missiles each day, and on some days not a single Tomahawk is fired. But why? Did Iran shoot down almost every US fighter jet? Of course not. But imagine if they said that in their media. We shot down 80% of American fighter jets. That's why their sortie numbers dropped so dramatically. Iran, unlike America, doesn't have Fox News or a similar propaganda machine. The real reason is that this is how wars progress. At first, the fighting is extremely intense. Then both countries begin preserving their capabilities and avoid burning through their entire stockpiles. But here is the billion-dollar question. Which country is doing a better job? If you look at Iran's attacks, they usually fire 20 to 50 missiles a day at multiple locations. For example, around 5 missiles for each US base they want to hit, along with hundreds of drones. Compared to the first day, Iran is operating at around 7% to 17% of its initial missile attacks. The US Air Force, however, is operating at only 1.5% to 4% of the sortie rate from the first day. As for Tomahawk missiles, the reduction is even more extreme, so you can easily see that Iran is preserving its capabilities much better than America. But why is that? Because we saw all those videos showing Iranian missile launchers being blown to pieces. Well, here's a secret that no one is talking about. Have you seen footage of the US Air Force destroying Iranian missile launchers? Can you tell me one thing? Why do most of these launchers have no crew? In some cases, you can see a few people around a launcher preparing it for launch, but in most of the footage, you don't see anyone. There is another clue. When a ballistic missile is hit, its booster usually ignites. I admit that doesn't happen every time, but it does happen most of the time. In many of the videos shown by the Americans, there is no crew around the ballistic missile and no booster ignition after the strike. But why? Because many of these launchers are just mock-ups designed to lure fighter jets away from the actual launch sites. Scott Ritter says that over 90% of the launchers hit are mock-ups or fake targets. In my opinion, about 30 to 40% are mock-ups, and maybe 10 to 20% are real launchers that had technical problems and were abandoned. Now Trump says that 85% of Iran's launchers have been destroyed. But here is the question. How does he know how many launchers Iran has? The US says Iran has 600 launchers. If 85% were destroyed, that means 510 launchers are gone. But if we assume that only half of those were fake, that would mean Iran still has 350 launchers, while 250 were actually destroyed. But I'm going to tell you something that these so-called military experts on Fox News and many YouTubers don't know. Iranian missiles don't need launchers to be launched. The IRGC has a system called missile farms. They place solid fuel missiles under the ground in the desert and bury them. Around each missile is a tube containing some type of compressed gas that blows away the dirt and sand, allowing the missile to launch within seconds. You may have seen footage of missiles suddenly coming out of the ground from nowhere. That's what a missile farm is. Each missile farm has about 10 to 30 missiles that have been sitting there for years. But what does that mean? This is where things get interesting. It means Iranian missiles are independent. The missile itself contains everything needed for launch. You only have to enter 2 sets of coordinates, where the missile is located and where you want it to hit. Once those 2 pieces of information are entered, the missile is ready to launch. People still talk about Iranian missiles as if they are Soviet-era Scud missiles. But today's technology has made these missiles a completely different system from what Western media tries to portray to uneducated audiences. So when you hear that Iranian launchers were destroyed, just know that it doesn't necessarily mean much. Iran builds 2 million cars every year, so are you really saying it can't produce missile launchers? If you look closely, most of these launchers are simply trucks that Iran produces domestically. But the insanity of American propaganda goes beyond this. And in the next section, we're going to deliver the final blow. What are the most common targets in the footage released by the US? You might say missile launchers, but no. They are hitting everything from 105mm artillery to boats, cars and trucks. They are hitting everything they can. They have even struck railways, main roads and bridges. But why? What does this kind of behavior show? First, it shows desperation. By attacking everything, Trump hopes Iran will surrender. But the most important point is this. You must understand that none of these targets are strategic. Blowing up a truck, a jeep, or a boat has little effect on Iran's military capability. If you look at Iran's targets, you see a different approach. Iran has destroyed over 20 strategic radars, each costing between $500 million and $2 billion. It has also targeted AWACS aircraft and fuel tankers. Even when you see an Iranian missile that appears to hit the middle of nowhere inside a military base, satellite imagery shows that it destroyed specialized hangars used for the repair and overhaul of US fighter jets. That has brought America's Air Force capability down from 3,000 sorties to fewer than 100 sorties. By hitting radars, Iran is also making US troops in the Middle East increasingly blind. Nowadays, 5 missiles can do more damage than 30 missiles could have done 4 months ago. Iran is slowly but continuously degrading America's military capability day by day. Iran's military has proved itself. Now we are trying to prove ourselves on YouTube. Please help this channel by liking, sharing and subscribing. Your support means everything. Thanks for watching. This is Eastwind Brigade, where our voices unite and we rise together.